Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that, well, cuts through the noise and takes you straight to the heart of the most complex conversations happening right now.
It really does feel like these debates are everywhere.
It's impossible to ignore them, isn't it?
Yeah.
These intense, often really polarizing debates dominating public discourse. We see them playing out in our classrooms, echoing through military bases, and, even sparking discussions within our own families.
Yeah, they're definitely not just abstract academic ideas anymore.
Not at all. They're discussions with profound, real-world implications, stuff that directly impacts our unity as a society, the opportunities available to us, and, frankly, the very fabric of our shared values.
You're absolutely right. And understanding these debates isn't just like an intellectual exercise. It's essential for navigating our contemporary world.
Right.
That's precisely why today we're embarking on a deep dive into a topic that consistently finds itself at the epicenter of so many of these discussions. Critical race theory, or CRT. Our mission today is to thoroughly explore its origins, its core tenets as understood by its proponents, and critically, the significant critiques and concerns raised by its opponents, all meticulously presented within the comprehensive source material we have.
And our entire deep dive for you today is meticulously constructed from a single, exhaustive source document, aptly titled Institutionalizing Division.
That's the one.
And I want to be crystal clear from the outset. Our objective here is not to take sides or endorse any particular viewpoint.
No, absolutely not.
Instead, we are here to impartially present the full spectrum of claims, the evidence cited, and the perceived implications that are detailed within that source. Ultimately, our goal is to empower you, our listener, to thoroughly digest this information and then draw your own well-informed conclusions.
Think of us as your expert guides through what can often feel like incredibly dense and, let's be honest, frequently misunderstood material.
Yeah, it gets confusing fast.
It does.
Yeah.
We'll help you carefully identify the key arguments, delve into the why and how behind the content, and hopefully uncover some surprising facts and connections along the way.
Okay.
Our overarching goal is to provide a clear, accessible structure that transforms these complex ideas into actionable knowledge, offering you a genuine shortcut to becoming truly well-informed on a subject that, well, profoundly touches nearly every aspect of contemporary life in America.
So with that mission firmly in mind, let's begin by doing what we do best, unpacking the foundations of critical race theory itself.
Let's do it.
And then immediately examining some of the compelling, competing perspectives highlighted right at the outset of our source material. What exactly is critical race theory as defined and presented within this document?
Okay, so at its core, the source defines CRT as an academic framework. It originally emerged from legal studies.
Legal studies, right.
And it posits a fundamental idea that racism isn't simply a matter of individual prejudice or, isolated intentional acts by a few bad actors.
Okay, so not just personal bias.
Exactly. Instead, it suggests that racism is a systemic issue, deeply and often subtly embedded within the very structures, policies, and institutions of society.
Structures like?
I think our legal systems, our educational frameworks, even our economic models, and, well, much more. It's woven in.
So it's about shifting the focus from individual biases to looking at the larger underlying patterns and structures that might perpetuate racial inequality, almost regardless of individual intent.
Precisely. Proponents of CRT, as described in the source, view this framework as absolutely essential for understanding complex power dynamics and the lasting legacy of historical injustices.
Power dynamics in history. Got it.
They emphasize how race doesn't operate in a vacuum. It profoundly intersects with other social categories, a concept often referred to as intersectionality.
Intersectionality. We hear that term a lot. What does that mean in this context?
It means understanding that someone's experience of discrimination isn't just about their race, but also how their race interacts with their gender, class, sexual orientation, or other identities.
Ah, okay. So multiple layers.
Right. For instance, the challenges faced by a Black woman might be distinct from those faced by a Black man or a white woman, because her multiple identities can compound in unique ways, creating specific forms of disadvantage or privilege.
I see.
The framework actively encourages a critical, often probing, examination of history, culture, and institutional practices, aiming to unveil these systemic inequalities that might otherwise remain unseen.
So it challenges the standard stories we tell ourselves.
It fundamentally challenges traditional narratives about race and equality, which often emphasize individual meritocracy without fully accounting for, well, structural barriers.
And if we extrapolate a bit, this foundational understanding of CRT, as presented by the proponents, it truly sets the entire stage for much larger societal debates, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It fundamentally influences the very approach to how society should, or perhaps should not, address racial disparities. It dictates the diagnosis and therefore the prescription for societal ills.
You've hit on a crucial point. It informs the very methodology for attempting to solve problems related to race and justice. Right. And what's immediately fascinating here is that while its proponents argue passionately for its necessity, the source document almost immediately introduces significant counterarguments
Counter-arguments, too.
to what it identifies as common perceptions or maybe misrepresentations of CRT.
That brings us directly to a very pointed section of the source, which challenges some widely circulated assertions about CRT. The document highlights what it refers to as the lies of CRT. These include claims that many might assume are true, such as CRT is not taught in schools, or
CRT is just a way to give previously marginalized people the attention they have lacked.
right, and even CRT is not Marxist. The source then implicitly or explicitly sets out to refute these ideas through its subsequent content, presenting them as, well, deliberate falsehoods.
That's a key framing device used by the document. It portrays these initial assertions as clear misrepresentations or even lies.
Strong language.
Very. It then proceeds to present extensive arguments and evidence claiming that CRT is indeed being integrated into curricula across various sectors, from K-12 education to corporate training and even military academies.
So it's arguing it is being taught, contrary to that first claim.
Correct. Furthermore, it explicitly argues that CRT's intensely identity-focused approach can actually deepen existing divisions rather than fostering unity.
Deepen divisions.
And perhaps most controversially, it meticulously outlines what it perceives as significant and direct connections between CRT and various strands of Marxist thought, particularly regarding power dynamics, systemic critique, and economic restructuring.
So the very structure of the source, specifically its table of contents, is quite telling, isn't it?
It really is.
It explicitly lists sections like CRT is not taught in schools, directly under a heading like the lies of CRT, and then follows up with detailed content designed to debunk that initial claim. This framing suggests a deliberate and strategic effort by the opponents of CRT, as presented in this document, to highlight what they perceive as deceptive portrayals of CRT's true reach, intent, and ideological nature. It's a very confrontational, rhetorical approach.
Indeed. It's a very pointed and combative way to begin, immediately establishing a contentious tone. It sets up the subsequent detailed critiques as a revelation of truth versus widespread deception.
Yeah, it definitely aims to shake up preconceived notions right from the start.
Exactly.
This intense debate over CRT's nature and prevalence naturally leads us to its perceived tangible impact. And the source document dedicates significant attention to how critical race theory is claimed to impact one of our most foundational institutions.
Education.
Ah, yes, education.
Yeah.
That's where it gets very personal for many people.
It's where the rubber meets the road for many parents and students. Absolutely.
And one of the primary concerns consistently highlighted by critics in the source is the profound potential for critical race theory to inadvertently create division and alienation among students. Division and alienation. How so?
They assert that CRT's intense emphasis on racial differences can, maybe surprisingly, foster an us versus them mentality within the very classrooms that are supposed to be uniting young minds.
That's a very striking assertion. The idea that classrooms, places designed to foster understanding and collaboration, could instead promote conflict, feels deeply counterintuitive to the very purpose of education.
It does feel counterintuitive.
What specific concrete examples or data does the source provide to illustrate how this plays out in real school environments?
The source elaborates extensively on this. When students are encouraged, or maybe even required, to view their peers primarily through the prism of race,
For instance,
being categorized as either oppressors or oppressed solely based on their racial identity, the document argues it risks reinforcing divisions rather than bridging them.
right.
This approach, critics contend, undermines the principle of shared humanity and common ground. It fosters an environment ripe for conflict and resentment rather than understanding and empathy. It suggests that a primary focus on collective guilt or victimhood, assigned by birth, can overshadow individual accomplishments, unique struggles, and the development of individual character,
Which could lead to
potentially leading to deep-seated resentment and withdrawal among students who feel unfairly targeted or perhaps perpetually disadvantaged.
And the source doesn't shy away from providing specific evidence for this, does it? it tries to back this up.
Not at all. The document cites surveys among high school students. One result was particularly striking.
Which was?
65% reportedly feeling uncomfortable discussing race due to a fear of being labeled as privileged oppressors or marginalized victims.
Wow, 65%. That suggests a chilling effect on open dialogue.
It certainly does. Furthermore, it includes numerous reports indicating that some white students have experienced significant anxiety, distress, and even guilt from lessons focused on their privileged or oppressor status, leading to real emotional and psychological burdens.
And specific school practices.
Yes, the source also explicitly cites examples of what it calls racially segregated activities within schools, like the formation of exclusive affinity groups based on race, or even separate graduation ceremonies designed solely for specific racial groups.
Separate ceremonies, really?
According to the source, yes. These practices, critics argue, directly perpetuate and normalize division rather than promoting integration and universal belonging.
It's chilling to consider, isn't it? If these claims hold true, we're not just talking about abstract academic disagreements.
No, it's about a profound impact on the emotional well-being of students.
And the very fabric of classroom communities. This dynamic could significantly hinder the development of empathy and collaborative skills that are vital for navigating a diverse society.
Absolutely.
It almost sounds like it could lead to social fragmentation within classrooms and communities, and the emotional toll on student anxiety, depression, lower self-esteem is certainly a significant long-term concern.
That's precisely the grave extrapolation the source makes. It argues these are not just theoretical risks, but direct, observable consequences of such pedagogical choices.
Creating a generation potentially less equipped for unity.
And more defined by perceived group grievance, potentially. The core insight here, from the critic's view, is that emphasizing group identity within a learning environment can inadvertently create the very divisions it purports to heal.
Posing a subtle but profound threat to civic trust and future collaboration.
That's the argument presented.
And these pedagogical choices also raise pressing questions about fundamental educational goals and the role of academic freedom itself.
Oh, right. Another huge area of contention.
Critics, as highlighted in the source, argue that when schools endorse specific singular ideologies, they risk creating an environment where dissenting views are marginalized, silenced, or even punished. What are the broader implications of this for intellectual growth and the pursuit of knowledge?
The document contends that such an environment inevitably leads to a homogeneous thought culture that stifles genuine intellectual growth, critical inquiry, and true diversity of thought.
So less challenging of ideas.
Exactly. It argues that this pressure forces educators to align their teaching rigidly with prevailing ideological narratives, effectively becoming conduits for a particular viewpoint rather than facilitators of open exploration.
Meaning teachers might self-censor.
That's a major concern raised. Teachers may feel compelled to adhere to very specific prescriptive language and frameworks around concepts like privilege and oppression. This leads to self-censorship and a severe limitation on presenting nuanced, multifaceted perspectives on race, history, or societal issues.
And that impacts students how?
It critically undermines authentic critical thinking by dictating the terms for discussion and perhaps predetermining conclusions, rather than encouraging students to engage in independent analysis and form their own informed opinions based on varied sources.
The source offers a very specific and controversial example of this, doesn't it, to illustrate the point?
It does. It prominently cites the California's Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, ESMC, as a prime example.
Yeah, what about it?
Critics argue that proposed curriculum changes within the ESMC require ethnic studies courses to explicitly address concepts like intersectionality and decolonization in a way that, in their view, prompts ideological indoctrination over balanced academic approaches.
So the concern is it's pushing one specific viewpoint too hard.
That's the core concern raised in the source, that it's not just about teaching history, but about teaching a specific ideologically charged interpretation of history, which could be seen as an imposition on academic freedom for both teachers and students.
Not education, but political conditioning, as the source suggests.
That's the framing used by the critics cited.
If that's the case, and schools are indeed prioritizing specific ideological alignment, it could result in future leaders and citizens prioritizing conformity over genuine dialogue and independent thought. The source suggests this poses a very serious threat to civic engagement and social cohesion, weakening the very foundations of a pluralistic, democratic society where differing viewpoints are debated constructively.
That's precisely the long-term societal risk identified by the document. It warns of a future where intellectual vibrancy is replaced by ideological uniformity. A pretty stark warning.
Definitely. Beyond the classroom walls, these intense debates highlight an even broader, fundamental demand for transparency and parental involvement in education.
Yes, transparency is a huge theme here.
The source makes an incredibly strong case for the imperative of parental involvement in their children's education, viewing it not just as a preference, but as a fundamental right.
It truly does. The document places significant emphasis on parents' fundamental right and primary responsibility for directing their children's upbringing and education.
Framing it how?
As both a constitutional and ethical imperative, it argues that parental involvement isn't merely beneficial, it's absolutely crucial for student success.
And it cites research for that.
Yes, pointing to extensive research, including a comprehensive review from 2002, which demonstrated that greater parental involvement leads to significantly better academic performance, higher graduation rates, and improved social skills for students.
So it's not just about feelings, it's about outcomes.
Right. The source further underlines that this involvement must extend beyond traditional methods, like attending parent-teacher conferences, to active, informed participation in local governance, influencing curriculum decisions and school policies.
And it grounds this assertion in powerful legal precedent, doesn't it? Highlighting that this isn't just a philosophical point, but a legally recognized right.
Yes, it does. It cites landmark cases like Pierce v. Society of Sisters from 1925.
What did that establish?
The Supreme Court affirmed the right of parents to choose private schooling, recognizing their liberty interest in directing their children's education.
Okay.
It also references the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause as implicitly upholding parental liberty interests, viewing the family unit as foundational.
Right, the family unit.
This foundational principle, as the source argues, firmly underpins the contemporary demand for greater transparency in educational content and decision-making.
Because
Parents, it asserts, cannot fulfill their responsibility without full knowledge of what their children are being taught.
So with that legal and ethical foundation firmly established, how do parents actually exercise this right in practice? What specific mechanisms are there for achieving such transparency according to the document? What are the tools available to them?
Well, transparency in education, as meticulously defined by the source, involves the clear, accessible communication of all curricular content, pedagogical approaches, and relevant policies to all stakeholders.
Especially parents.
Especially to parents and guardians, yes. The document explains how such transparency profoundly empowers parents.
How does it empower them?
Enabling them to truly understand learning objectives, reinforce lessons effectively at home, and critically assess whether the content aligns with established academic standards and, importantly, with their community's values and expectations.
And it promotes accountability, too.
Crucially, yes, it promotes a deeper level of accountability within schools, as decisions and materials are open to public scrutiny.
This sounds like a powerful shift, transforming parents from passive recipients of information into active participants and advocates.
That's the idea.
What specific mechanisms does the source highlight to achieve this?
It details several key mechanisms. First, it highlights FOIA requests.
Freedom of Information Act.
Exactly. Explaining how FOIA and similar state public records laws enable parents to formally request and access official documents related to curricula, lesson plans, textbooks, training materials, all of it.
Is there an example?
Nicole Solis's inquiries into her child's kindergarten curriculum in Rhode Island are presented as a prominent example.
What happened there?
It shows how a single parent, using these tools, can demand clarity and accountability on contentious subjects like race or gender identity. Her case, in particular, galvanized national attention and inspired similar actions.
Okay, so FOIA is one tool. What else?
Secondly, the source details various state initiatives. It cites Florida's highly publicized parental rights and education law.
The one often called Don't Say Gay by critics.
That's the one, though the source uses its official title. It mandates parental notification and consent on certain sensitive topics and encourages open communication.
Other states.
Indiana's Attorney General's roadmap for parents providing guidance on exercising their rights is mentioned. Texas is highlighted for its specific requirement of public disclosure of curricula.
And the impact of these laws.
The document claims that these state-level policy interventions have demonstrably led to increased parent engagement and satisfaction, fostering a more collaborative environment.
Interesting. What's the third mechanism?
Finally, school boards are emphasized as absolutely crucial decision-making bodies and accessible platforms for parental input.
Local control, right?
Exactly. The source cites numerous examples of organized parent groups successfully mobilizing at local school board meetings, effectively challenging, and in some cases reversing, the incorporation of specific CRT tenets or related ideological content into school curricula and policies.
So local action is key.
These local battles, the document argues, are where much of the practical power lies for parents.
So it's not just about sharing information, but about transforming parents into active participants and advocates, isn't it?
That seems to be the goal highlighted.
The source implies this could lead to significantly stronger partnerships between families and schools, mitigating mistrust and fostering a deeper sense of community ownership over local education systems.
That's the ideal outcome the document offers, the vision of greater harmony and shared purpose that can emerge from genuine transparency and collaboration. It presents it as the antidote to growing distrust.
However, there's always a however, isn't there?
Usually is with these complex topics.
Despite these concerted efforts, the source indicates that significant challenges persist, and these transparency debates often become deeply entangled in broader ideological conflicts. What are some of those challenges and conflicting positions that complicate this picture?
Well, the document highlights a significant tension, often framed as a conflict between parental rights and professional autonomy.
Teachers' expertise versus parents' rights.
Essentially, concerns exist, particularly among educators and administrators, that extensive parental input could potentially undermine educators' professional judgment, restrict academic freedom by limiting what can be taught, or even lead to micromanagement of pedagogical approaches.
And things move slowly sometimes.
There's also the issue of institutional inertia, where large school systems can be slow and resistant to timely changes, even when faced with significant parental demand.
And sensitive topics are particularly tricky.
Absolutely. The document meticulously explains the tension between educators' expertise and parents' desire for oversight, especially on sensitive and culturally charged topics like gender identity, sexual education, or specific interpretations of political ideology, where common ground can be incredibly elusive.
And the source provides a particularly striking example of this tension, one that directly challenges the credibility of a major teachers' union, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a very pointed critique. The document references the National Education Association, NEA, one of the largest teachers' unions in the U.S.
What does it say about the NEA?
The source states that the NEA initially and publicly denied that critical race theory was being integrated into school curricula, dismissing such claims as politically motivated.
Okay, a denial.
However, the document then asserts that the NEA later effectively acknowledged its presence in educational materials.
Acknowledged it after denying it.
In response to verified complaints and widespread evidence, according to the source, this perceived inconsistency, a public denial followed by a quiet acknowledgement, according to the source, significantly fosters parental distrust.
I can see how that would.
And raises profound questions about the NEA's credibility and its fundamental commitment to transparency and honest dialogue with families. It frames this as a betrayal of trust.
That kind of mixed messaging and apparent backtracking could certainly create a profound risk of alienating families and sparking broader, more intense political ramifications, transforming what should be collaborative discussions over curriculum into bitter, intractable battles rather than opportunities for growth and refinement. It's a very challenging dynamic to navigate, with high stakes for the future of public education.
It truly highlights the depth of the societal divisions impacting our institutions. When trust erodes between such crucial stakeholders, the pathway to constructive resolution becomes incredibly difficult.
Speaking of critical institutions, the principles of unity, shared identity, and perceived ideological imposition also extend to an even more vital one: the military.
Ah, the military. A very different context, but similar debates are emerging.
The source presents the U.S. military as a uniquely compelling case study in unity and shared identity, particularly in its ability to transcend differences for a common mission. How does the document make this case, and what makes the military distinct in this regard?
The document argues that the U.S. military uniquely transcends individual characteristics like race, gender, socioeconomic background, and even personal political beliefs.
To focus on what?
To prioritize a singular collective identity centered unequivocally around a common mission, defending the nation.
And how is that achieved?
It details how rigorous and intentionally transformative training, such as the Crucible of Boot Camp, systematically strips away civilian identities, actively breaking down individualistic tendencies.
Purposefully breaking people down to build them up together.
Essentially, yes. This process is designed to foster unwavering discipline, absolute teamwork, and what the renowned sociologist Charles C. Moscow's termed a collective identity, a profound sense of belonging to something larger than oneself.
And combat strengthens this.
Shared experiences, particularly those endured under the extreme duress of high-stress combat situations, are described as creating profound, unbreakable bonds of trust and interdependence. Service members, the source notes, often refer to their comrades as family, a testament to the depth of these relationships forged through shared sacrifice and reliance on one another for survival.
That paints a powerful image of cohesion, almost a countercultural model for unity in a diverse society. Does the source offer compelling historical or modern examples to bolster this argument for military unity?
Absolutely. It delves into rich historical and contemporary examples. Historically, it highlights President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948.
Desegregation.
Right, which boldly desegregated the armed forces as a monumental watershed moment. This wasn't merely a policy change. It was a profound societal experiment that proved unity across racial lines was not only possible, but beneficial for combat effectiveness.
Specific units.
The document mentions the valor of the 761st Tank Battalion, famously known as the Black Panthers, and the iconic Tuskegee Airmen as powerful examples of diverse units excelling with extraordinary distinction despite facing systemic racism.
Even within the military at the time.
Exactly. Their dedication to duty and unity, it argues, unequivocally defines success on the battlefield.
What about more recently?
Moving to the post-9/11 era, the source notes that efforts intensified to build even more inclusive environments, recognizing diversity when channeled effectively as a genuine strength. It references studies indicating that diverse teams, when properly integrated and led, are often more innovative and effective at problem solving.
Leadership plays a role too.
The document emphasizes the critical role of leadership. It cites leaders with high emotional intelligence, EI, like General Colin Powell.
How so?
His focus on troop welfare and cohesion during Desert Storm significantly boosted morale and operational effectiveness. It draws a parallel to Satya Nadella's leadership at Microsoft, noting his emphasis on empathy fostered a more supportive atmosphere, leading to superior outcomes.
And modern training examples.
For modern examples of unit cohesion, the source points to Marine Corps basic training, which intentionally cultivates an almost familial camaraderie. And of course, the enduring image of the Band of Brothers from World War II serves as a classic illustration of tightly knit relationships contributing directly to effectiveness and survival.
So this powerful emphasis on unity, mission accomplishment, and the collective good above individual differences has historically been a cornerstone of military effectiveness.
According to the source, yes.
And significantly, the source suggests it has even influenced broader societal integration efforts, offering a compelling model for how diverse groups can achieve collective action.
That's the core argument the source presents for the military's inherent strength and its unique role as a societal unifier. It's a foundational ideal, according to the document.
However, here comes the but again. The source argues very strongly that the introduction of critical race theory principles poses a significant and existential threat to this hard-won unity and cohesion within the armed forces.
Yes, this is a major point of alarm raised in the document.
What are the specific concerns critics raise about CRT fostering division in the military, and how is this different from, say, just celebrating diversity?
Opponents argue that CRT's inherent emphasis on racial identity, its framework of perceived victimhood, and its focus on racial privilege can lead to the very segmentation and us versus them mentality that the military has painstakingly worked to eradicate.
So the opposite of unity.
This, they contend, is directly antithetical to military principles of camaraderie, mutual respect, and the absolute necessity of a shared purpose.
How does it play out practically?
The source explains that when mandatory discussions and training sessions overemphasize differences rather than commonalities, service members may begin to feel alienated or defined primarily by identity markers like their race or gender, rather than being united by their shared mission, their rank, or their commitment to fellow soldiers.
Undermining trust.
critically undermining the deep trust and interdependence, which are paramount elements for operational effectiveness, especially in combat scenarios where lives depend on unquestioning loyalty and cohesion.
And are there any reported instances or specific examples cited within the document to illustrate this concerning trend of division and dissatisfaction?
Yes, the source provides troubling accounts. It points to numerous reports from various branches of the U.S. military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, indicating a palpable rise in dissatisfaction and even resentment among personnel following mandatory diversity and inclusion training sessions
Training sessions based on CRT frameworks.
that are reportedly rooted in CRT frameworks, yes. These sessions, critics claim, often involve concepts like white privilege, systemic racism within the military itself, and implicit bias in a way that creates division rather than understanding.
Any specific initiatives mentioned?
The document cites specific incidents, such as the U.S. Army's People First initiative. While intended to improve well-being, it reportedly led to factionalism.
Factionalism, how?
Soldiers, it claims, began to see each other not primarily as fellow service members, but as representatives of different racial narratives, example, oppressor versus oppressed categories, causing significant dips in morale, trust, and unit cohesion.
Are there historical parallels drawn?
The source also draws stark parallels to historical examples like World War I and the Vietnam War, where it claims a documented lack of cohesion and internal divisions, though stemming from different factors, contributed significantly to disastrous campaigns and weakened military effectiveness.
And outside political debate spilling in.
Furthermore, the document suggests that external perceptions and the intense political polarization around CRT spilling into military discussions create factions based on differing ideological beliefs, risking fundamental morale, readiness, and the apolitical nature that the military relies upon.
So if these claims are accurate, this could directly translate into a severe decrease in operational effectiveness.
That's the fear.
As you said, cohesion and trust are absolutely paramount for high-stress situations, and if they are compromised, the military's ability to execute its mission is fundamentally threatened. The source appears to be asserting that this risks reversing the decades of progress made since desegregation under President Truman, effectively reintroducing divisions in an institution that had successfully transcended them.
That's the significant, almost apocalyptic warning the document delivers. It frames CRT, as interpreted by its critics, as a fundamental threat to the military's very fabric, jeopardizing its historical strengths and future capabilities.
Wow. This leads us to explore the deeper ideological underpinnings of critical race theory, particularly its alleged connections to Marxism, which is a major point of contention for critics highlighted in the source.
Yes, the Marxism connection is a really heated part of the debate.
To fully grasp this connection, let's start with a brief historical context of Marxism itself and how it has evolved.
Okay. The source reminds us that Marxism, a revolutionary social and economic theory, originated in the 19th century with the foundational work of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
And its core idea.
It advocates for a classless, stateless society to be achieved through revolutionary means, primarily by overthrowing capitalist systems.
And its historical impact.
The document emphasizes that Marxism, in its various forms, has historically posed significant and often violent threats to democratic societies worldwide. It cites chilling examples like the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, leading to the totalitarian Soviet Union, and the myriad of other communist regimes in the 20th century, resulting in widespread human suffering and oppression.
And the West's response.
The document details how Western Cold War strategies, like the Truman Doctrine, the massive Marshall Plan, and NATO, were explicitly aimed at containing this perceived existential threat of global communism.
But then the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right. While the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 is largely presented as a definitive victory for democracies and free market capitalism, the source critically asserts that this event paradoxically created fertile ground for alternative, often mutated ideologies to gain traction.
How so?
With the overt threat of Soviet communism gone, the ideological battle shifted to more subtle cultural battlegrounds.
So even with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the core ideas didn't simply vanish. How does the source demonstrate communism or Marxist-inspired ideas morphing or reappearing in different forms post-1991, sometimes unexpectedly?
It provides several compelling examples of this ideological resurgence and adaptation. Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez, is cited for its Bolivarian revolution and the embrace of socialist rhetoric appealing to those disillusioned with neoliberal economics.
Leading to major changes there.
A radical restructuring of the economy and society? Yes. China is presented as a fascinating paradoxical case, embracing aggressive capitalist practices,
But still communist politically.
yet fundamentally retaining a rigid Marxist-Leninist ideology, showcasing a unique blend of state capitalism with authoritarian party control.
And in Europe?
In Western Europe, the source points to the rise of left-wing parties like Syriza in Greece or Podemos in Spain. Driven by dissatisfaction with austerity and the 2008 financial crisis, they openly adopted elements reminiscent of Marxist thought, advocating for greater state control and wealth redistribution.
It seems like the source is drawing a very direct line from these powerful historical ideological currents to contemporary social justice movements, specifically through the lens of CRT.
Yes, it makes that connection explicit.
And it attributes this resurgence to various intertwined factors.
Exactly. This modern resurgence of Marxist-inspired thought, it argues, is directly linked to persistent economic disparities, widespread political discontent, and evolving cultural narratives.
And technology plays a role.
The source notes that social media platforms in particular have played a catalytic role, democratizing information and amplifying what it terms counter-hegemonic narratives that challenge mainstream ideas about capitalism and power structures.
Allowing radical ideas to spread faster.
This digital environment has allowed radical groups, often implicitly or explicitly inspired by communist ideals, to disseminate their messages rapidly and widely, bypassing traditional gatekeepers and reaching disaffected populations.
This brings us to the source's central and most controversial claim, aligning modern social justice movements, particularly those informed by CRT, with Marxist ideology. How does the source establish this connection, and what similarities does it highlight?
Okay, so the source explicitly claims that modern social justice movements, while seemingly focused on issues of race, gender, or identity, often align with core Marxist ideology.
What's the alignment?
It argues that they share a fundamental emphasis on systemic change over individual advancement, often presenting a scathing critique of capitalism itself, and frequently issue broad calls for radical structural reforms across society.
Can you give an example?
For example, it states that organizations like Black Lives Matter, BLM, while ostensibly responding to racial injustices and police brutality, have, according to the source, much broader agendas.
Broader agendas like?
These agendas include profound critiques of capitalism as an inherently oppressive system, and advocate for policies that aim to fundamentally challenge existing economic disparities and power structures.
So connecting race and class struggle.
This, the document asserts, aligns quite closely with classic Marxist tenets of class struggle, but reinterpreted through a racial lens, where the oppressed class is defined by racial identity rather than purely economic standing.
And the source mentions a very specific, prominent project in this regard, doesn't it? A key cultural touchstone that embodies this alleged alignment.
It does. The 1619 Project, initiated by the New York Times Magazine, is presented as a prime example.
How does it fit this narrative?
By boldly centering slavery and its legacy, and critically, capitalism's alleged intrinsic link to slavery, in the foundational narrative of American history, the source claims this project effectively reinterprets core American values such as individualism and meritocracy.
Reinterpreting them how?
It argues that the project fosters a narrative where capitalism, rather than being seen as a vehicle for opportunity, is viewed as a fundamental perpetuator of systemic oppression, inherently tied to racial injustice.
Which critics link to Marxism?
This reinterpretation, critics argue, aligns with Marxist historical materialism, which views societal development through the lens of economic and class conflict.
What concrete examples of this alleged alignment with Marxist critique does the source provide, particularly in terms of policy proposals or rhetoric?
The source provides several examples it deems illustrative. Calls for widespread wealth redistribution, like highly progressive taxation or implementing a universal basic income, UBI, are cited as echoing classic Marxist critiques aimed at dismantling vast economic inequality.
And policing.
Additionally, proposals for radical reforms within law enforcement, most notably the controversial call to defund the police, are highlighted.
How is that linked to Marxism?
The document argues these reflect a deeper desire to dismantle perceived structures that critics claim uphold capitalist interests under the guise of public safety, effectively acting as an enforcement arm of an oppressive economic system. It's a reframing of societal problems as inherent to the capitalist system itself.
Critics, then, would logically argue that such sweeping shifts, driven by this collectivist and anti-capitalist mindset, could seriously undermine personal freedoms and individual liberty.
That's the fear expressed.
They might even suggest it risks leading to authoritarian tendencies, reminiscent of historical socialist regimes. This really raises important questions about where the line is drawn between societal welfare and the protection of individual rights.
That's precisely the core tension the source identifies. It's a fundamental debate over the balance between individual autonomy and collective societal restructuring, central to any discussion involving these Marxist-inspired initiatives as they intersect with social justice movements.
This collectivist mindset and the alleged anti-capitalist critique, particularly as they manifest in identity politics, are seen by critics in the source as having significant, potentially detrimental consequences for societal unity and the principle of meritocracy.
Yes, the critique broadens out here.
What are the perceived risks of this anti-capitalist critique when applied through the lens of CRT?
Well, the source notes that proponents of CRT often contend that capitalism is intrinsically and inextricably linked to systemic racism.
Arguing what?
Arguing it perpetuates deep-seated inequalities and disproportionately benefits white individuals at the expense of others. They therefore advocate not just for reforms, but for dismantling these inequities through fundamental structural change.
But the document warns against that.
However, the document highlights very significant risks associated with an outright dismissal or radical restructuring of capitalism.
Risks like
Dire consequences for overall economic stability, such as widespread uncertainty and increased risk aversion among entrepreneurs and investors, which can stifle investment and growth.
and competitiveness.
It warns that prioritizing social justice metrics over profitability and market efficiency could severely jeopardize a nation's competitive edge in the global economy, stifle innovation across industries, and deter top talent from pursuing entrepreneurial ventures.
Ultimately impacting jobs and prosperity.
Ultimately, it argues, this could negatively impact job creation and overall societal prosperity, leading to a diminished quality of life for all.
The source offers a rather stark cautionary tale for this, doesn't it? A real-world example of what happens when these ideas are put into practice on a national scale.
Yes, it prominently cites Venezuela's move towards socialism under Hugo Chavez as a profound cautionary tale.
What happened there, according to the source?
Chavez's policies, involving extensive nationalizations, price controls, and wealth redistribution driven by socialist ideology, are presented as directly leading to widespread shortages of basic goods, hyperinflation, economic collapse, and a humanitarian crisis as the economy faltered under state control and capital flight.
So a warning against radical change.
The source uses this to underscore the potentially devastating real-world consequences of radical anti-capitalist policies. The document then explicitly advocates for open, constructive dialogue about capitalism's acknowledged shortcomings.
Like inequality or lack of opportunity.
Right, rather than fostering divisive ideologies that seek to overturn the entire system.
And it doesn't just critique. It offers constructive ways to address perceived inequalities within a capitalist framework, suggesting that the system can be reformed rather than abandoned.
Exactly. It proposes specific reforms to capitalism designed to promote equity and opportunity within the existing framework.
Such as?
It cites powerful examples like the GI Bill, a post-WWII initiative that facilitated massive upward mobility and wealth creation for millions of veterans, including many from marginalized communities through educational and housing benefits.
Another example.
It also mentions community development financial institutions, or CDFIs.
What are those?
Specialized financial institutions that provide capital and financial services to low-income and underserved communities, thereby addressing market gaps and fostering local economic development.
So paths to opportunity within the system.
These are presented as proven ways to provide opportunities for marginalized communities and bridge wealth gaps without dismantling the entire economic system.
This critique extends to how identity politics, fueled by CRT's framework, impacts decision-making in various sectors, from major corporations to the entertainment media.
Yes, the focus shifts to identity politics now.
Let's delve into that, starting with identity politics itself and its perceived divisive potential in society.
Okay. The source describes identity politics as a phenomenon where individuals increasingly prioritize their racial, ethnic, gender, or other group identities over a broader, collective national purpose or shared human experience.
And the risk.
This, it contends, inherently risks creating an us versus them mentality, fostering social fragmentation rather than unity.
How does it undermine merit?
The document explains that this approach can overshadow merit-based evaluations. the idea of hiring or promoting based purely on individual skills, qualifications, and talent, which critics argue are crucial for effectiveness and fairness in many fields.
Leading to division.
It suggests this leads to divisions based on differing interpretations of equity or justice, where groups compete for resources or recognition based on their perceived historical grievance or victim status.
Competing groups.
Furthermore, it can lead to intense competition for visibility and resources among various identity groups, potentially neglecting broader economic inequalities or societal issues that might affect multiple demographics, regardless of their specific identity.
This alleged prioritization of identity over merit seems to play out in very visible, often controversial ways, especially within the media and entertainment industries, according to the source.
Definitely a hot topic there.
Can you provide some specific examples that the document highlights?
Indeed. The source highlights several high-profile controversies in casting decisions within media, where roles are perceived as being assigned based on adherence to identity criteria rather than purely on an actor's talent or suitability for the role.
Like which ones?
It cites the case of Kristen Bell stepping down from voicing the mixed-race character Molly in the animated series Central Park.
Why did she step down?
She explained that she felt a Black actress should voice the role, sparking a debate about authenticity versus artistic freedom.
Another example.
Sierra Boggess withdrawing from a production of West Side Story, reportedly due to concerns about her racial background and whether it was appropriate for her to play a Puerto Rican character, again, fueling the identity matching debate.
And Scarlett Johansson.
The document also recalls Scarlett Johansson facing significant backlash for roles in films like Ghost in the Shell, where she played a character originally depicted as Japanese, and her casting as a transgender man in Rub and Tug, both criticized as whitewashing.
And the Nina Simone biopic.
Finally, the source mentions Emma Dabiri's criticism of Zoe Saldana's casting as Nina Simone in the biopic Nina, arguing Saldana's lighter skin tone and the use of prosthetics failed to capture Simone's authentic essence, raising questions about who has the right to portray certain identities.
This dynamic, as the source argues, could profoundly stifle artistic expression and creative freedom, potentially creating a cultural landscape where identity supersedes raw talent and merit, and even alienate broad audiences. It reflects what some observers term a cultural backlash against what they perceive as overreaching inclusivity efforts.
That's the direct implication the source draws, highlighting what it considers the unintended and detrimental consequences of such a rigid application of identity politics in creative fields.
A tension between artistic merit and ideological purity, perhaps?
That's how the source frames it, yes.
And this pervasive shift in emphasis on identity is not just in policy and casting decisions. It's profoundly shaped and amplified by media discourse itself.
The media's role is crucial here.
The source argues that mainstream media has undergone a significant transformation in its discourse around race, evidenced by a dramatic increase in the frequency of key terms related to systemic racism. How is this evidenced empirically in the document?
The document provides compelling empirical evidence from research, notably citing Zach Goldberg's work.
What did Goldberg find?
His work revealed a dramatic and statistically significant surge in the frequency of specific terms like systemic racism, white privilege, and intersectionality in prominent mainstream publications.
Which publications?
Goldberg's analysis, covering elite media outlets such as the New York Times and the Washington Post between roughly 2014 and 2019, showed a tenfold increase in the use of some of these terms.
A tenfold increase. Wow. What's that linked to?
This remarkable increase, the source argues, is directly linked to major societal events like the burgeoning Black Lives Matter movement and a heightened focus on incidents of police violence.
So the media reacted to events.
The document interprets this as an intentional and conscious framing strategy by mainstream media to educate and shape audience understanding about the nuances of racial inequities and power structures in America.
Can you give us a few more specific examples from the source on how this transformational language played out in major publications and how it informed public understanding?
Certainly. The source elaborates on several key instances. It notes that references to systemic racism in the New York Times, for instance, reportedly increased tenfold over that 5-year period.
Indicating a shift.
A deliberate editorial shift towards this analytical framework, yes. Karen Edia's impactful use of white privilege in the Washington Post during the peak of BLM activism is also cited, showing how once academic terms entered mainstream journalistic lexicon.
And the 1619 Project again.
The 1619 Project, by the New York Times Magazine, which famously re-examined U.S. history through the lens of slavery, is highlighted as a monumental example.
Its core assertion.
It controversially asserted that anti-Black racism runs in the very DNA of American institutions, fundamentally reframing the nation's origin story and its current challenges.
And the George Floyd protests coverage.
Furthermore, the source notes that mainstream media coverage of the George Floyd protests significantly shifted its focus, moving beyond individual acts of police misconduct to emphasize systemic injustice and accountability for broader institutional failures.
So phrases like defund the police became mainstream.
Phrases like defund the police and Black Lives Matter became not just protest slogans, but mainstream topics of discussion and debate in major news outlets.
And social media's role.
Social media platforms are also acknowledged for their powerful role in this shift, democratizing information dissemination and rapidly amplifying what the source calls counter-hegemonic narratives, allowing alternative perspectives on race and power to reach vast audiences, often bypassing traditional media gatekeepers.
So this linguistic transformation profoundly influences not just what audiences think about racial issues, but how they think about them.
Exactly. It shapes the framework.
It could certainly lead to greater awareness and empathy for marginalized groups. However, the source also warns that it carries significant risks.
Risks like?
Such as oversimplification of complex issues, the creation of echo chambers where only one perspective is amplified, and potentially marginalizing or silencing alternative perspectives if the discourse is not handled with profound intellectual rigor and a genuine diversity of thought.
That's the critical balance the source encourages us to consider. It acknowledges the potential for increased awareness, but also warns against the inherent risks of a pervasive, ideologically driven shift in media language that could inadvertently lead to a less nuanced and more polarized public understanding of race.
These seismic shifts in ideology and media discourse, particularly surrounding race, are not merely academic or theoretical concepts.
No, they became very real.
As the source extensively details, they tragically manifested in a very violent and visceral way during the widespread 2020 civil unrest. What was the immediate catalyst for these protests, and what was their broader nature, according to the document?
The horrific killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis in May 2020 is unequivocally presented as the single, immediate catalyst for nationwide protests. It ignited a powerful wave of outrage across the United States.
And the initial focus?
Initially, these demonstrations were primarily focused on condemning police brutality and challenging the pervasive pattern of violence against Black people.
But they evolved?
However, the source states that these protests quickly evolved, broadening their scope to become a much larger, systemic critique of deeply entrenched injustices.
Covering what issues?
This expanded critique encompassed a wide array of societal issues: profound economic inequality, stark healthcare disparities, persistent educational inequality, all viewed through the lens of racial injustice.
Were they all peaceful?
While the document acknowledges that the vast majority of these protests were largely peaceful demonstrations of dissent, it crucially highlights that they frequently and tragically turned violent.
Resulting in?
This escalation led to widespread instances of looting, arson, and property destruction across the country, significantly increasing polarization and fear. This revealed what the source terms the dual nature of protests.
Right, yes.
The fundamental and protected right to express dissent versus the often unintended yet devastating consequences of violence and social breakdown.
And the slogan, Black Lives Matter.
It resonated deeply, becoming a rallying cry that spurred both peaceful demonstrations and, in some contexts, regrettable instances of violence and disorder.
So the unrest brought to the forefront the incredibly complex and often fraught interplay between social justice movements and the grim reality of violence.
Yes, a very difficult dynamic.
Prompting a national reassessment of how society addresses issues of race, justice, and how it enforces law and order. And the human cost of this unrest is vividly and tragically documented through the numerous deaths that occurred.
Making this part of the source particularly somber. It is indeed. The source dedicates a sobering, detailed account to over a dozen specific deaths that occurred amidst the 2020 protests.
Highlighting what aspects?
Highlighting the deeply multifaceted and often tragic nature of the violence. These individual incidents, as meticulously described, illustrate a disturbing array of dynamics.
Such as?
Law enforcement fatalities, civilian deaths caught in literal crossfire, desperate business owners attempting to defend their livelihoods and property, and direct, often deadly ideological clashes between opposing groups.
Raising difficult questions.
Each incident, The source notes prompts complex and difficult questions about individual accountability, the boundaries of self-defense, the role of firearms in public demonstrations, and the dangerous influence of extremist individuals who exploit chaos for their own agendas.
Let's focus on a few of the more prominent examples from the document to illustrate this deeply complex and tragic picture. The source certainly doesn't pull its punches here.
No, it doesn't. The document first highlights the tragic death of David Patrick Underwood, a Federal Protective Service agent.
What happened to him?
He was shot and killed while on duty outside a federal courthouse in Oakland, California. Allegedly killed by Stephen Carrillo, a former military officer with documented ties to the Boogaloo anti-government extremist movement.
Underscoring what danger?
This case, the source notes, profoundly underscored the severe dangers faced by law enforcement officers amidst the unrest and highlighted the insidious presence of ideological fanaticism exploiting the chaos.
Another officer.
Next, the source details the death of Damon Gutzwiller, a Santa Cruz police deputy, also linked to Stephen Carrillo's extremist actions, further emphasizing the direct threat posed to public safety officials.
Then there's the case in Omaha.
Then there's the incredibly polarizing case of James Scurlock, a Black protester, tragically shot and killed in Omaha, Nebraska by Jacob Gardner, a white bar owner protecting his property.
Sparking what debate?
This immediately sparked heated national debates about self-defense laws, gun violence, and racial disparities in the application of such laws, deeply dividing public opinion.
And in Austin.
Another highly complex incident is the death of Garrett Foster, a racial justice protester and Air Force veteran, openly carrying an AK-47 in Austin. He was killed by a private security guard, Daniel Perry, who claimed self-defense.
Leading to debates about
Second Amendment rights, armed self-defense and protests, and the fraught specter of vigilante justice. Very contentious.
in Portland.
Finally, the document details the fatal shooting involving Michael Renault, a self-proclaimed anti-fascist who shot a far-right group member in Portland and was himself later killed by law enforcement.
Raising questions about what?
Raising profound questions about police methods, political violence from various extremes, and the dangerous concept of martyrdom in political movements, further fueling cycles of violence.
The source then goes on to list other casualties, painting an even broader, more harrowing picture.
Yes, it provides a longer list.
These include an unnamed gun store owner in Philadelphia, Marquis M. Tazan in Davenport, Barry Perkins in St. Louis, Calvin Horton Jr. in Minneapolis.
Tragic stories across the country.
Scott Hutton in Arkansas, Richard Doloff in Denver. It also recounts events in Kenosha involving Aaron Danielson and Anthony Huber, killed by Kyle Rittenhouse.
Another incredibly divisive case.
And Javar Harrell in Detroit, David Dorn, a former police chief in St. Louis, Jose Gutierrez in Cicero, Dorian Merle in Omaha. These individual stories collectively paint a broader picture of profound societal fracturing.
And the severe human cost when collective anger meets confrontation and armed conflict. They force society to grapple with the incredibly difficult balance between individual rights, collective protest, and public safety.
Absolutely. The document uses these individual stories, each a tragedy, to underscore the deep societal divisions, the inherent volatility of protests when order breaks down, and the devastating consequences.
It's a stark reminder of the fragile nature of social cohesion.
And these tragic deaths also intensified scrutiny on law enforcement across the nation and sparked widespread calls for significant police reform.
Yes, huge calls for reform.
Including some truly controversial proposals that sought to fundamentally redefine public safety. What were the main debates on law enforcement and public safety that emerged from these events, according to the source?
The protests, particularly after George Floyd's killing, led to unprecedented scrutiny of law enforcement practices and a powerful surge in calls for comprehensive police reform.
Including defund the police.
Among the most controversial proposals was the movement to defund police departments, which, as the source clarifies, generally meant reallocating significant portions of police budgets away from traditional law enforcement.
Toward what?
Towards social services, mental health initiatives, housing support, and community development programs.
What was the argument for that?
Proponents argued that many issues handled by armed police could be more effectively and humanely addressed by trained social workers or other community professionals, reducing potentially violent encounters. They advocated addressing root causes of crime.
But critics, as the document points out, had very strong and often data-driven counter-arguments to these proposals, particularly defunding.
Yes, the counter-arguments highlighted in the source are robust. Critics contended, often forcefully, that drastically reducing law enforcement presence lacked empirical support as an effective crime-fighting strategy.
And could lead to.
More critically, could lead to a demonstrable increase in crime rates, thereby creating widespread insecurity and chaos within communities.
Does the source cite examples?
It meticulously cites historical examples. Reductions in policing in New York City in the late 1960s and parts of Los Angeles in the 1990s, which were, it argues, correlated with subsequent crime surges.
More recently.
More recently, the document notes that Seattle's proposed police budget cuts in 2020 were reportedly followed by a notable increase in violent crime, including homicides, leaving many residents feeling significantly less safe.
It sounds like there's a strong emphasis in the source, not just on the potential downsides of reducing policing, but on the importance of effective policing and what that looks like.
Indeed. The document thoroughly highlights the importance of effective policing strategies that can both deter crime and build community trust.
Like what kind of strategies?
It emphasizes proactive initiatives, community-oriented policing models, citing examples like police athletic leagues and structured neighborhood watch programs, and the critical role of transparency through technologies like body-worn cameras.
Body cams help how?
Shown to reduce instances of excessive force and improve accountability.
But reforms are still needed.
The source acknowledges that, amidst these debates, there is a clear and urgent need for meaningful reforms focused on enhanced de-escalation training, mandatory bias awareness programs, and crucially, more diverse hiring practices to ensure police departments better reflect the communities they serve.
Why are those reforms key?
These reforms, it argues, are essential steps to rebuild trust and legitimacy between law enforcement and the public.
The fundamental challenge, then, as the source implies, lies in finding a delicate and incredibly difficult balance.
A very fine line.
One that genuinely respects the goals of social justice and equity, while simultaneously ensuring robust public safety and security for all citizens. This tension point, the document suggests, continues to define many of the most contentious policy discussions in America today.
It's a critical and enduring balancing act, and the source makes it unequivocally clear that achieving this equilibrium reconciling justice with safety is paramount for the long-term well-being and stability of society. It's arguably one of the defining challenges of our era.
As we wrap up this incredibly comprehensive deep dive, it's abundantly clear that we've navigated through a multi-layered and often profoundly contradictory narrative surrounding critical race theory.
It certainly has many layers.
We've explored its alleged pervasive influence on foundational institutions like education, its perceived impact on military cohesion, its controversial connections to economic structures and capitalism, and its role in fueling identity politics.
All set against the somber backdrop of the 2020 civil unrest.
Exactly. The source material we dissected presents a mosaic of strong arguments from various, often opposing viewpoints.
It meticulously reveals a society grappling with incredibly profound and often unsettling questions about its foundational ideals, its history, its values, its very future. It's a testament to the immense complexity of these issues, where easy answers are few and far between.
And it's crucial for us to reiterate that these issues, as presented in the source, are deeply polarizing.
Incredibly so.
With fervent arguments and deeply held convictions on all sides. This polarization is clearly reflected in the source material's impartial presentation of arguments, both for and against CRT's widespread influence and its perceived effects.
Right.
It's not about us finding or presenting a single undisputed truth, but rather helping you understand the many, often conflicting truths being asserted and passionately debated across the nation.
Ultimately, this deep dive forces us, and you, our listener, to confront a fundamental and ongoing question that lies at the heart of our contemporary society.
Which is?
In a nation increasingly defined by both a fervent demand for diverse representation and a profound, perhaps even nostalgic yearning for collective unity, how do we, as individuals and as a community, navigate these powerful, often conflicting currents?
How do we move forward constructively?
Ensuring that the pursuit of justice, however defined, does not inadvertently institutionalize or deepen the very divisions we claim to want to heal.
A truly powerful thought to ponder as you continue your own deep dive into these critical and evolving topics. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.